Modern medicine is, well, it's pretty amazing. We can do things now that were pure science fiction a generation ago. But all those miracles, they come with a pretty hefty price tag. And that creates this huge dilemma. How do you balance the cost of a drug with the value of a human life? So let's just put it out there. Imagine a new drug hits the market. It costs $100,000 a year. Is it worth it? The answer, it's not a simple yes or no. It really depends. I mean, what does the drug actually do? Does it cure a fatal cancer? Or does it just, say, lower your cholesterol by a few points? Figuring that out, that is one of the toughest challenges in all of healthcare. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll talk about what value even means when we're talking about a drug. Then, we'll get into the basic equation that's behind all of this. After that, we'll unpack the four main tools the experts use. We'll take a deeper look at what goes into the cost side of things, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with why this is so incredibly important. Okay, so that big question, is a drug worth the price? It's not just something you can have an opinion on. There's a whole field of science designed to answer exactly that. It's called pharmacoeconomics. And really, it's the science of making sure we get the most bang for our buck when it comes to our health. What's kind of wild is just how new this all is. I mean, you think about medicine, you think about sciences like anatomy, which have been around forever, right? Since the 1800s. But pharmacoeconomics, it really only got going in the mid-1980s. So it's a young field, but with treatments costing millions of dollars today, you can see why it's become absolutely essential. So how does this whole science actually work? Well, when you boil it all down, it comes back to one simple idea. It's all about balancing the scales between what we put in and what we get out. And this right here is the core concept. On one side of the scale, you've got the costs. That's the money, the resources, all the inputs. On the other side, you've got the outcomes. Those are the health results, the outputs. Pharmacoeconomics is just a systematic way of comparing these two sides. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. To actually make that comparison, experts have a specific toolkit. Think of it like a toolbox with four main methods they use to figure out a drug's real value. This table is basically the cheat sheet for the entire field. You can see the four types of analysis here. And notice, for every single one, the cost on the left is measured in money. That part's easy. The tricky part, and this is the key to everything, is how you measure the outcome on the right. So let's go through them one by one. First up, we've got the simplest tool in the box, cost-minimization analysis, or CMA. You only use this when you have two treatments that are proven to give you the exact same health result. The perfect example, a brand name drug versus its identical generic version. So if the results are identical, the decision is a no-brainer, right? It's purely about the money. You just pick the cheapest one. It's super straightforward. But here's the catch. It only works if those outcomes are truly the same. And a lot of the time, they're not. So what happens when the outcomes aren't the same? That brings us to our next tool, Cost Effectiveness Analysis, or CEA. This is what you pull out when drug A gives you a different result than drug B, but you can measure that difference in a real clinical way. And what are these natural units? Well, they're the things your doctor measures all the time. Things like, how many extra years of life did this treatment provide? Or by how many points did this pill lower someone's blood pressure? CEA lets us calculate things like the cost per life year gained. Now we get to something really powerful. It's called cost utility analysis, and it's a special type of CEA. This method gets that just living longer isn't the whole story. The quality of that life is just as important. It asks the big questions. Does this drug let someone live without constant pain? Can they work? Can they play with their kids? And to measure that, CUA uses this absolutely brilliant metric called the Quality Adjusted Life Year, or QALY. You're going to hear this term a lot. It's pretty much the gold standard today. A quality is just a single number that manages to capture both how long you live and how well you live. It's quantity and quality all rolled into one. So let's make that real. 1 year lived in perfect health, that's one QALY. Simple enough, but let's say a disease cuts your quality of life in half. Well, 1 year lived in that state is worth half a QALY, or 0.5 QALYs. And suddenly we have a way to compare a treatment that gives you many years of difficult life against one that gives you fewer years but in perfect health. It's a game changer. Okay, our last tool is the most ambitious and, yeah, probably the most controversial. It's called cost-benefit analysis. And here, the goal is to convert everything, costs and benefits, into dollars. You figure out the cost of the drug in dollars, and then you try to calculate the benefit of the health outcome, also in dollars. The rule itself seems straightforward. If the dollar benefit is bigger than the dollar cost, you do it. But wait a second, this forces us to ask some really tough, almost impossible questions. Like, what's the dollar value of a year of a person's life? How much is it worth to prevent a lifelong disability? See, it's a powerful tool, but it's packed with ethical landmines. So we've spent a lot of time on the outcomes side of the scale. But let's circle back to the costs for a second, because it turns out the cost of a drug is way more than just the price on the bottle. When analysts add up the total cost, they look at the whole picture. Of course, you have the direct costs, the price of the drug, the doctor's visits, the hospital stays. But they also factor in indirect costs. Like if a new drug allows someone to go back to work, that added productivity is a financial benefit. They even try to consider intangible costs, like the value of reducing pain and suffering. It's a true 360-degree view. Shoo! Okay, so we've covered the theory, the equations, the 4 big tools. But let's zoom out. Why does any of this actually matter in the real world? What's the ultimate bottom line here? At the end of the day, it matters because we don't have unlimited money for healthcare. Every dollar spent on one drug is a dollar that can't be spent on something else. Pharmacoeconomics gives hospitals and governments a smart, rational way to make these incredibly tough choices, all with the goal of getting the most health possible for the entire population with the resources we have. But here's the thing. Even with all the data and all the analysis, it's not the end of the story. These tools, they give us an answer, a number, but they don't replace our judgment or our values. They inform our decisions. They don't make them for us. Which leaves us with the biggest question of all. When we're talking about someone's health, what does value really, truly mean?